Yesterday I talked about the new Man-Eater bug upgrade, which I said was a very cool card, but it probably wouldn't see play. And a lot of you guys agreed with me on that and also said that they wished that Konami would help out flip effects more in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And I completely agree. Flip effect monsters used to be some of the best monsters in the entire game. Cyber Jar, Morphine Jar, Magician of Faith, Fiber Jar, and so many others all were great at tournaments and saw tons of success. So what happened? Well, obviously Yu-Gi-Oh! Got a lot faster over the years, but even with that happening, flip effect monsters have seen play in more modern times. If I think back to Snowman Eater and Geargia Armor like about 5-10 years ago, those cards were great, and while they're not technically flip effect monsters, they do have effects that activate when flipped. So those are basically flip effect monsters in my mind. And even right now, we do still see flip effect monsters around. Decks like Subterrors and Shadalls do play flip effect monsters even in 2021. But despite a few standouts of flip effects seeing play in modern Yu-Gi-Oh!, the vast majority of flip effect monsters really are not very good, and they haven't been good in a long time. Konami has tried many different times to make flip effects good, and a lot of those have not really worked. Things like crawlers and prediction princesses, for example, do bring new things to the table in regards to flip effect monsters, but they weren't quite good enough to see competitive play. Shadalls and Subterrors are the exception, not the rule, and I think that's important to remember when talking about flip effects in the context of modern Yu-Gi-Oh! To figure out how Konami should fix flip effect cards going forward, let's talk about the two biggest downsides to flip effect monsters in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! The first downside is speed. This matters probably more than anything else. Flip effect monsters are some of the slowest cards in all of Yu-Gi-Oh!, even slower than trap cards in most situations. Think about it this way, with the average trap card and the average flip effect monster, you set them on your turn and then wait to turn to use their effects. Now obviously in both cases there are ways to trigger them earlier, but we're talking about the average card right now, and in those cases the trap card can usually be used earlier than the flip effect monster, and more importantly, you usually have a greater choice with trap cards. What I mean by that is, when you have a card like Torrential Tribute, you get to choose when you want to flip that card to wipe the board. But a flip effect monster, unless you have outside support, just sits there until your opponent flips it face up by attacking over it. Maybe they don't attack it and they let it survive until your next turn, in which case you do have a bit more control, but in many cases throughout Yu-Gi-Oh's history, that's not really how it worked. People would attack your face down monster, and that's how you would trigger most of your flip effects. Now a lot of the more modern flip effect strategies do have ways to speed things up. For example, in Subterrors you have the Hidden City, Shadalls have Sinister Shadow Games, which admittedly kind of has fallen out of favor with more modern Shadal deck lists, but it was a very popular card back in 2014 when they were first released. You can also look at a card like Penguin Brave, which was just released in Phantom Rage last year, so this card is very new and it's a great piece of flip effect support. It not only helps you trigger your flip effects when you want to, but also it special summons a penguin from your deck in face down defense position whenever you synchro summon it, which means that you have access to flip effect monsters a lot easier than you did in the past. So I think that Konami is aware how slow flip effect cards are in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And it seems like they're trying to give us a lot of support to speed those cards up. However, the other big problem with flip effects, in my opinion, that Konami is not really addressing is the overall power level of these cards. Flip effect monsters, as I've already kind of talked about, are pretty hard to use in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! They're pretty slow, they're pretty awkward, so naturally, in my mind, flip effects should be better than regular effects, at least on average, and I don't really think that's the case. A lot of the best flip effect monsters that are even seeing play right now, like in Subterrors and Shadalls, don't really have better flip effects than your average card in your average competitive deck. And that is an issue, because if you are going out of your way to play a flip effect deck, if you are going out of a way to play a weak mechanic, the payoff should be very big, and right now I don't think think that's the case. Now, Konami has tried printing a few very powerful flip effects in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, Pot of the Forbidden is a great card if you can manage to make it work. It has 4 powerful effects that you can use when it is flipped face up, which is great, and you can play it in a deck like Prediction Princesses, which not only can special summon it pretty easily, but also can trigger those effects pretty much whenever you want. But Prediction Princesses have other issues. They're not quite good enough to make a card like Pot of the Forbidden actually playable, and that is definitely a problem. I feel like the power level of flip effects should be so much higher in comparison to other cards being printed right now, and that really has not been the case. Back in the day, though, that was the case. That was one of the biggest reasons to play flip effects. You weren't going to see an effect like Morphing Jar or Cyber Jar on a normal summonable monster. There's this weird problem where I feel like Konami correctly identified speed as the bigger issue for flip effect monsters, but now they need to shift their focus to the power level of these cards. Overall, speed is the bigger of the two issues, but Konami keeps giving us more and more cards to speed flip effects up. So now we need to talk about the power level of these cards, and I feel like Konami really hasn't done that enough. So now that we know 2 of the biggest issues with flip effect monsters, how can Konami make them better? Well, we've kind of seen this with the Subterror cards and the Shadal cards, but it's pretty nice when Konami gives these flip effect cards other effects that don't require them to be flipped face up. I think that is a way to improve flip effect monsters quite a bit, and I hope we see more of that in the future. The other thing, though, that I feel like Konami really hasn't done that we could use is more generic flip effect support. For example, what if they printed a card that was like, neither player can normal summon monsters, they have to set them first, and then if you set a flip effect monster, you're allowed to flip summon it in that same turn. It wouldn't restrict special summoning, I think that would be taking it too far, but it would encourage people to try out flip effect monsters. I think right now one of the bigger issues with a lot of the flip summoning support is that it's all archetype specific. I think we need more generic support for flip effect monsters. Now, Konami would have to be very careful about any generic flip summoning support, specifically because of decks like Subterrors and Shadals, but I think that they could do it, and I think overall it would be cool to have flip effect monsters back in the game at a competitive level outside of just Subterrors and Shadals. Anyway, that is pretty much all I have to say about flip effect monsters for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. So let me know in the comment section below if you have any ideas for what Konami could do to help out this mechanic. I really think that flip effects might be one of the worst mechanics in the entire game right now, so they definitely could use some more support. I'll see you guys later. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.